So there are a few different ways I react to seeing and wearing a new watch that I bought for the first time. You know, sometimes it's a slow sinking feeling of, oh man, why isn't this making me as excited as I thought it would? And sometimes I'm just happy that I bought a new watch. But then for the good ones, I'm just in awe of them and I can't stop looking at them. And then there are the rare ones that just make me laugh just because of how bizarrely good and striking they are. Yeah, this SPB411 Navigator Timer is that last one. It's that good, and it's easily one of the overall best executed watches that Seiko has made, especially at this price point in the past decade plus that I've been into watches. And it goes beyond it being, you know, all gray everything, which I obviously love. So in this video, I'm gonna get into the details of the watch, the dimensions, how it wears on the wrist, and of course, all the insanely goodness of the dial, case, and the bracelet. So yeah, anyways, let's get into it. Oh, it's so good. So as always, let's do the dimensions first. And for me, they're about as good as they get because we've got ourselves a case width of 38.7 millimeters and a thickness of 12.9 millimeters and a lug to lug of 45.4 millimeters. And on the wrist, it legit feels like it's 12 millimeters or less because of that swooping case and the tapering case back. In terms of the overall size, it wears perhaps a touch smaller than 39 millimeters, partly because of the bezel is a touch smaller than the 38.7 millimeter case, but I think it's mainly down to the 19 millimeter lug, since that's 1 millimeter less of bracelet visually up top. And then also it has a 3 millimeter taper, which is great. And you can really see the size difference when you see it next to the Slim Willard. And for more context, here it is next to the 39 millimeter Spirit Zulu Time and the big wearing 37 millimeter Black Bay 54. And on the wrist, it's just such a comfortable watch. The underside of the case is tapered, so it sits nicely on the wrist, and the bracelet feels good and awesome, and it comes in at 126 grams for my 7.5-inch wrist. So it's, you know, solid, but also just super easy to wear 24/7 if you really wanted to. And I gotta say, the entire watch feels expensive, you know, bracelet included, which definitely isn't always the case. And yeah, there's always just something that lets a Seiko down a little bit, and most of the time it's the bracelet. Yeah, but here it feels every bit as expensive as the $1,500 price tag, and probably a bit more. And honestly, if someone handed this to me without me knowing anything about the watch and they said that it was an SLA model, I think I would have believed them. And yeah, as I'll explain in these next sections. So back in 2019, I saw the original vintage version for the first time at the District Time show in DC. And I think it was on the wrist of one of the Notice guys. And it was just otherworldly, basically perfect for these. So much so that I almost bought one at the show where DC Vintage Watches had their booth. And a huge reason why I was so instantly struck by it was because of the gray dial. And as many of you know, gray is my favorite color, and on this new version, the gray dial is the star of the show because Seiko got it right pretty much all the way through. The color tone is spot on just because it's not too cool, it's not too warm, and the sunburst finish is surprisingly good as well. You really get to see all the micro details of the finish without, you know, it being ruined by a matte finish. And the handset works well with the watch. You know, it's simple, double faceted stick hands, but they did their usual half brushed, half polished finish that I love seeing. And of course, there's that teeny tiny red GMT hand, which is technically obviously too small, but the original version had it, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I mean, it's very much a part of the Navigator Timer design now. Finally, the indices are simple batoned, but they're sort of lined on the tops, and then also they are very three-dimensional, which elevates the entire watch a whole bunch. And I can't stop looking at their shadows and how the brush surfaces reflect in different lighting situations, especially when it's rotating or moving, and you can see the sides of the indices glimmering. Oh, and the Seiko name is applied as well, and this just makes, once again, the entire watch more elevated and makes it feel even more high quality. And lots of people are going to be really excited about the Prospex X being left off the dial, and while I've never really had an issue with the X in general, I'm happy that it's not here because it looks so clean without it, and it feels like a new old stock watch, which is exactly what I would want from a vintage reissue. And yeah, I mean, I'm looking at it on my wrist and I still can't believe that this exists. as the way it is right now. I mean, it's the next big star of the watch is the bracelet, and I was really worried because sometimes Seiko bracelets end up being a bit bulky or they end up pulling hairs, and I didn't want any of that to happen because the bracelet looks so good. And yeah, thankfully none of that is here, and it looks as good as it is comfortable because it's got a flat link design that's 5 across, and I'm so happy that Seiko made this a flat link because not only does it look so good when you're doing your 500th wrist roll of the day, but it also keeps a little bit more unique and I guess a little bit more modern looking for a classic watch. And thank God they brushed all the top surfaces because it keeps an otherwise very striking looking bracelet a bit more low key, and plus I just like brush surfaces more, so there's that too. And yes, it has a 19mm lug width, and yes, would I have liked a 20mm lug width? Of course, just so I can try out my own straight end bracelets. But since this is a reissue, and since the older Seikos and Grand Seikos use 19mm lugs a lot, I am okay with it, but more so because the bracelet happens to work well on my wrist and because it happens to also have a 3mm taper, which is always nice to see. And it working well on my wrist wasn't a guarantee since the simple clasp only has 2 micro adjust holes, and yeah, in order just to keep the entire clasp smaller and more subtle. But yeah, honestly, I would have wanted at least like 1 or 2 more micro adjust holes, then it could have been even more perfect. And yeah, also because there aren't half links. But on the other hand, I guess these links are on the shorter side, so it does help out a little bit. Also, I'm really happy to see that this got its own bracelet, you know, not an off-the-shelf one, because this really deserves its own thing. Although I wouldn't say no to a Slim Willard style bracelet because that one looks really good. And now the case and bezel, and starting with the case design, I love it so much because I love the design of the Slim Willard case as well, and this case works for all the same reasons. I love the swooping mid case, and here the sides are polished, which I'm okay with since the top side is brushed. And interestingly enough, this is its own bespoke case. It's a bit smaller than the Slim Willard case, and it's got a 19mm lug width, and it's I think a little bit thinner. Oh, and I usually don't talk about case backs much, but I mean, you gotta love the Seiko horseshoe here. I mean, it adds even more to that new all stock feel that I love. However, there is one thing that I wish that this watch had, and that's drilled lugs, especially since so many new Seikos have them. But of course, the original Navigator Timer didn't have them, so that's, you know, fair enough. Next up is the bezel, and it's a clickless 24-hour bezel, which means you'll never have a misaligned bezel, and I love me a good steel bezel as well, and I think that this combo with the gray dial just looks next level. And the bezel feel is super smooth and is actually quite stiff. It takes more force to turn it than it does on the SSK GMT, but that's okay since the coin edge bezel grip here is very, very good. And I guess the only thing that I would have liked more is if the typeface was just a little bit less bold, like on the new Alpinist GMTs, but again, they're keeping things accurate here, so not a big deal. And while we're on the case, let's talk about what's inside of it, the movement, and it's the 6R54 that we find in Seiko's slightly higher end watches like my Marine Master 200 GMT. And yeah, it's a good solid movement, and adjusting the 24-hour jumping GMT hand feels very good and very solid and very clicky, and the accuracy so far is looking good, but obviously it hasn't been very long, so we'll have to see what it's like in the long term. So there you have it. Let me know down in the comments what you think about this awesome new release, and yeah, go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe button if you enjoyed the video. Helps a bunch, and yeah, lots more to come over the next few months. And yeah, until the next video, good day.